Why are some mastering engineers, and sometimes just the mastering community as a whole, so damn toxic? Every profession and industry has it. Those purists who argue with their clients when they want revisions, telling them that they know better, or in the online threads, commenting saying unless you have $30,000 monitors or a certain bit of analog gear or use certain equipment, that your setup is useless for mastering. So today we're going to go through this session by the artist Uday, and hopefully while I'm going through this session, I can answer these three questions. Why are some mastering engineers so toxic? How closely do the purist mastering practices align with the reality of running a commercial studio? And ultimately, how can you deal with toxic engineers, especially if you're a beginner starting out? So let's take a listen to this mix because it is banging, and then I'll show you what I did in the session. Let's go. How awesome is that bass? It is big, it is bombastic. So the first thing I've got in the chain is standard clip, doing my standard sort of process standard, just maintaining and clipping off those little peaks. So I'll play that, but the next stage is something you want to stay and watch because it's using Unisum in a very unique way. But first I'll show you the clip. Now, this song, big bombastic bass, sustained bass passages, and then the drums, very percussive, very snappy. Why Unisum? Why not TDR Katalnikov? Now, it comes down to this multiband detector here, and mainly my ability to control the RMS window speed and the peak gain independently for each band. I opted to use a slower RMS speed or RMS window here and not use any peak gain on the low frequency detector. But on the high frequency detector, the high frequencies, I've cranked the shit out of the peak gain so it is controlling all the percussive snap. And what I'm actually doing is, you got ratio multiplier here. So what's happening is the low end is, when the low end is triggering the compression, it's increasing the ratio by 1.3. But then when the snappy parts are hitting, it's decreasing the ratio by 0.7. So the high end triggers the compression with less ratio, whereas when the low end's triggering it, or more of the low end signals trigger it, it's increasing it. So it's more gelling when the low end is sustaining and getting big and bombastic, and more open and snappy when the peaks of the transients are hitting through. I've got this level matched, so take a listen to how this is all operating, and you'll get an idea for where I'm coming from using Unisum like this. So now I have to get to answering the first question. Why are some engineers so toxic? Why is sometimes the mastering community so toxic? Little dick syndrome. Simple as that. People are insecure, and that's just part of some of the human condition. Ego becomes the driver, and they act like assholes. I've seen engineers, and really good engineers, and even engineers I know, do this to their clients, and it's a killer because it's like, why are you doing this to the people who are paying you to help them? It just so happens that's how some people are geared and wired, and that's why they do it. The other reason is running a mastering studio. It's a high volume, fast-paced work environment, especially now, 2020, 21, 22, 23. Engineers are really feeling the squeeze, especially on their P&L sheets. So money's a little bit tighter. They get a little bit more stressed. The way they react to situations is a bit funny, especially online when there's new people coming up, the way they're critical of them. It's just, like I said at the start of this, why are some engineers so toxic? It's insecurity, it's ego, all meshed into one. Now, you've seen me use this quite a few times, but the little subtlety, the little piece de la resistance happens here on the level. You know, I use the mid signal, add harmonics to the side, but what I've recently noticed is I usually keep the level at 0, and that's not necessarily good because what happens is as more harmonics come out on the side, the punch in the center sort of gets lost. So what I've been practicing now, or just sort of starting to implement into my workflow, is tweaking the level of those harmonics, -3, -4.5, -6 dB, to sort of balance how much width I'm adding to the bass in opposition to how much punch is in the mix.
It's a nice subtle bit of stereo flavor there, especially the harmonics that are coming from that sub energy down the center. Then we've got Dyne 1. Very typical for me to use Dyne 1 in this fashion. You've seen it 100 times. On the Gina Fontanella song, Dylan's dad manipulated one of the upper mid bands. In this one, I just kept it flat. I didn't have any need to change it around. It just helped bring out some of that transient information in a nice way. I'll play it through once so you guys can hear what it's doing, but you sort of know this sort of sound that I use anyway. All right, we're going to look at the Diamond Saturator in a second because I'm using one of Luca's presets he told me about, which really makes this slap. But I want to answer the question first. How closely do Purist mastering practices align with the reality of a commercial studio? And by Purist mastering practices, I mean the -1 decibel true peak, -14 LUFS, $30,000 speakers. Things have to be XYZ, otherwise it's just not mastering grade. And that's another one. Mastering grade, what quantifies and qualifies that? The reality of a commercial mastering studio, one that is producing masters for clients, producers, engineers, labels, publishers. There's only one sort of thing. How will what you do perform in the real world? And by perform in the real world, when a label gets a master back, they expect it loud. They not just expect it loud, they expect it dynamic, smashing, hitting properly and loud, which sounds a little bit like of an oxymoron, loud and dynamic, but they just want it to sound freaking A. And that's really a highly competitive market for mastering engineers because there are some who can do it really well, make things super loud and it smacks really hard, and others where things just fall apart. And you can't afford to, number A, have things fall apart when you push them loud because then the labels just won't send you work, or B, send stuff at -14 LUFS because they'll get it back and they will think that you just sent them back the mix, or they will just laugh at it. They won't even consider it. They won't even email you back. They'll be like, what the fuck's this? I'm not going to even bother with this engineer. That's period factual truth, okay? So the Purist mastering practices and the reality of running a studio are two different things. Now, where is there some crossover? Because you're probably going, Nick, it can't be complete BS. Like, there has to be some truth to it. There is some crossover. Things like, using lossless files, that's pretty blanket across any music production step. Use WAV and AIFF files. Yes, we do that. The way you name your files, the way you export them, the way you apply dither. Yep, these are really important steps that we need to adhere to. But some of the more fringe stuff when it comes to the type of gear or the type of tools you use that has to be a certain mastering grade, or the speakers, that's all, in my opinion, not aligned with the reality. I know other engineers mastering records while they're freaking doing a road trip on their headphones, and they're doing a great job. So it's sort of like, how closely aligned are those things? There are a lot of beginners, a lot of people starting out in mastering or mixing engineers who want to learn more about mastering. They hear things, they see things, and then we experience things, and sometimes they're not the same thing. Just wanted to clarify a few things there, especially on those more toxic conversations that happen in mastering communities where people get put down, and it's sort of like, why is that happening? That's not necessarily always the reality of what the industry represents. Now, Diamond Dynamic Saturator. This setting, I call it the Luca setting because this is the setting he talked me through in my interview with him, and you can check out the interview. There'll be a link in the description below. Basically, you've got these density 1, 2, and 3, and whenever I use this particular setting on density 2, all the snap, all the pop, it hits really good. And you can hear how I'd use this on the INAS-X record I showed you a couple weeks ago. But it sounds even better on things with big bombastic 808s. So take a listen to this before and after. especially that downbeat on the kick. It slaps, it hits harder. I like this. The one thing is, and I always do this after this particular setting on the Diamond Saturator, I just do a push and pull in the top end just to tame it a little bit. Those hi-hats got a little bit too over the top of the beat. And I'll actually play this before and after because I didn't do this last time in the video for in SX. So you guys can actually hear what this is doing to those hi-hats before and after. So there you can definitely hear that. It just softens those hi-hats a little bit, warms it up. Doesn't make them as intrusive. So that way when you crank the speakers really loud, it's not going to be like a jackhammer in your ear. So we'll go through the Ozone and then I'll answer the last question, how to deal with toxic engineers. The EQ is actually from Ozone Assisted, and I liked what it did to the low mids. It made it warm in a really nice way. And I'll play that for you, and then I'll show you all the stuff I did between the stabilizer and the limiters. So take a listen to this. Just warms up and makes all the low end a little bit rounder. Well, not necessarily the low end, but those low mids, which make me feel like the kick is a little bit bigger. Then the stabilizer, you know, that's my typical go-to. Just cut the highs, any harshness gets tamed. This is something I learned from good old Will Borza. And again, this is sort of like me being a toxic engineer. Me, because Will told me about this. He goes, use the vintage limiter first to do all the main sort of gain reduction and then use it maximize just a little bit afterwards. And me being me, I'm like, yeah, no, why would I do that? I don't even like the vintage limiter. It doesn't make any sense. And then I did it. Me being stubborn with my ego, if I'd been doing this ages ago, I would have had another trick in my book. But basically, the vintage limiter in analog mode has a bit of a curve it leans into. So the threshold at 8, and you'll see the amount of gain reduction when I play this, it isn't all that much. And then the maximizer is just at 2. Barely doing anything, but it makes it so freaking loud. So take a look at the overall loudness and these two limiters stacked against each other. It's wild. It's wild. So before I play this master before and after level match, I have to answer the question, how can you deal with toxic engineers? Like when you encounter one of those conversations which are just going a bit pear-shaped, it can be a difficult thing to sort of task yourself with, to sort of take on their commentary and then deal with it. The thing is, I always come from the position that I don't know something that they know. So I always try and dig down to where they're coming from. Even if they're being rude, even if they're being horrible or nasty, it's sometimes the best way to do it because you might uncover some things that they know that you don't, or you might actually come to a situation where you might not dispel some of the things that they're going on about, but they might be able to understand your position better by simply being open-minded. The other thing is also, sometimes things aren't purely technical or purely mastering practice or operational specific. Sometimes people get nasty, they get personal. It is a part of the sort of toxic community that can come out. And I always think to myself, what gets this person up in the morning and what sort of place are they in their life where their day is occupied with putting this sort of negativity out to the world? And then I remember that's probably a sadder position to be in than being on the receiving end of it, because I can't imagine waking up in the morning to go deal crap to other people for the sake of it and having a laugh. It just doesn't, it doesn't compute in my mind. So, and the reason why I'm saying this is because there are some engineers who are starting out or aspiring mastering engineers who might cop some flack, who might cop some shit. And I want you to know, if people are getting personal with you, it's more a reflection on the other people, not yourself, and to not get yourself down in the dumps about it. Just sort of remove yourself from those situations. Now, with those 3 questions answered,
I promised you something. And I promised you the before and after level matched. So let's do that. You can just hear those downbeats. They snap harder, they hit harder. I enjoyed mastering this. This was a great deal of fun. And it was also pretty easy. It was right to my sensibilities. However, there are some masters which, how do I put it, I really struggle with. And if you're curious about what I find is the hardest part of mastering, go check out this video where I detail it all with the session. And until next time, take care.